The Hierarchy of Money by Stephanie Bell. The Hierarchy of Money. In the treatise on money, Keynes distinguishes between the money of account and money by stating that the money of account is the description or title and the money is the thing, which answers to the description. He goes on to say that if the same thing always answered to the same description, the distinction would have no practical interest. But if the thing can change, whilst the description remains the same, then the distinction can be highly significant. It is because different things do answer to the description of the money of account that there exists what Minsky referred to as a hierarchy of monies. Let us examine the structure, composition of the hierarchy using the chartalist theory supported by Minsky. The description or title referred to by Keynes is the unit in which all money in the hierarchy is denominated. In the U.S., the unit of account is the dollar. Thus, all money in the hierarchy is dollar-denominated chartal money. Why the dollar? That is, why is the dollar, and not some other unit, the title or description to which all money in the hierarchy must answer? The chartalist theory of money as a creature of the state gives us the answer. Because the government's currency is the only legal means of discharging tax liabilities, and because tax liabilities recur period by period, the private sector will continuously need dollars. Thus, the ubiquitousness of dollar-denominated tax liabilities in the U.S. makes the dollar the standard unit of account for all money in the hierarchy. Because the private sector will always be indebted to the government in dollars, they will prefer to write all money contracts, make all promises in terms of dollars. In short, the unit in which state money is denominated and in which taxes are due determines the unit of account for all money in the hierarchy. Recall that money represents a promise to pay, IOU, and that these promises can be created by anyone. The secret to turning these promises into money is getting other individuals or institutions to accept them. Therefore, the hierarchy of money can be thought of as a multi-tiered pyramid where the tiers represent promises with differing degrees of acceptability. But at the apex is the most acceptable or ultimate promise. But if all promises are denominated in the same unit of account, why are some deemed more socially acceptable than others? Whose promises will be the most acceptable? And why would anyone agree to hold the relatively less acceptable promises? Let us examine the different types of money included in the hierarchy. In Knapp's treatment, all money represents a chartal means of payment. That is, all money is a ticket or pay token, which gains validity by proclamation that it will be accepted as a means of payment. These tickets or tokens, which individuals, institutions have proclaimed acceptable as a means of payment, do not become money until they have been accepted by another individual institution. When, for example, the Postal Service proclaims that a 32-cent stamp will be accepted as payment for delivery of a small envelope, an individual or institution must agree to hold the stamp, to accept the stamp as the debt of the Postal Service, in order for it to become chartal money. This is consistent with our requirement that the creation of money involve accepting another's debt and with our conception of money as a two-sided balance sheet operation. The stamp, an asset to its holder, is a liability to the post office until used as a means of payment, affixed to a letter and relinquished for delivery. If we apply this logic to all chartal money, we could theoretically construct a list of every conceivable form of money. Going back to Keynes, then, a great number of things will answer to the description or title of money. That is, every plane ticket, prepaid phone card, movie ticket, subway token, etc. is a form of chartal money. One could anticipate the disaster ahead if we were planning to describe the hierarchy of money in detail. It will, therefore, be useful to narrow our focus and to proceed with a general discussion of the hierarchy. We can consider the group of potential promise makers to be the government, banks, firms, non-bank, and households. When a firm makes a promise, issues, say, commercial paper, it promises to convert this promise on some specified date into a bank's promise, a demand deposit. Likewise, when a household makes a promise, issues debt to, say, a credit card company, it promises to convert its promise into a bank's promise. In the above, the secret to getting household and business debts accepted is a proclamation that they are convertible, at least potentially, into the promise of someone higher in the pyramid. Footnote 10. We can think of chattel money, which is not strictly dollar denominated, as potentially convertible into a dollar-denominated promise. For example, the cloakroom token is technically coat-denominated money. That is, the cloakroom is promising the return of a coat, not the payment of some amount of money. If, however, the attendant should accidentally lose, damage, etc. a coat, the holder of the token may be compensated for the monetary value of the coat. Thus, the token is potentially convertible into a state or bank promise, cash or check. End footnote. Commercial paper, bonds, and credit card debt will, assuming the issuer does not default, be retired by delivering the promise of a bank. This condition does not, however, apply to all money in the hierarchy. Unlike households and firms, state promises and certain bank promises would be accepted even if they were non-convertible into anything else. Even though, today, banks make their promises, demand deposits, convertible, on demand, into the state's promises, government money. That is not the reason they are accepted. It is because bank money is accepted at state pay offices that it, along with state-issued currency, is considered by Knapp to be the decisive money of the system. Referring to the money of the system, he notes that, quote, all means by which a payment can be made to the state form part of the monetary system. On this basis, it is not the issue, but the acceptation, as we call it, which is decisive. State acceptation delimits the monetary system. By the expression state acceptation, it is to be understood only the acceptance at state pay offices where the state is the recipient. End quote. James Tobin also recognizes the ability of creditors to influence acceptability, stating that if my creditors will take marbles in settlement of my debts to them, why should not I in turn take marbles from my debtors? Similarly, though focusing on bank deposits, Minsky realized that acceptance might depend on the willingness of creditors to accept bank money, stating that the exchange value of deposits is determined by the demands of debtors for deposits needed to fulfill their commitments. End quote. Footnote 11. Although Minsky was primarily concerned with situations where the bank was the creditor, the same argument can easily be extended to the state. That is, once bank money becomes accepted in payment of taxes or other liabilities to the state becomes the creditor, and debtors will demand bank money in order to fulfill their obligations to the state. End footnote. Thus, bank promises, demand deposits, will be accepted by the public not because they are convertible into anything else, but because they are accepted in payment to creditors. Likewise, the state's promises do not depend on convertibility into anything else. Footnote 12. Here, we are referring specifically to state-issued fiat money. State promises could, of course, also take the form of government bonds, but while these promises also have a place in the hierarchy, unless they are accepted in payment of taxes, they will be situated below state and bank money. End footnote. As Foley noted, the state does not have to pay its liabilities by transferring something else. End quote. Thus, neither the state nor the banks rely on convertibility for acceptance of their promises. What makes them both acceptable is not convertibility into something else, but acceptance in payment to one's creditors, in particular, the state. Recall that a money's place within the hierarchy depends on the degree to which it is accepted by society. As the decisive money of the system, both the state's promises and bank promises rank high among the monies of the hierarchy. We can, however, think of the state's promises as the ultimate promise in the pyramid. The state's money, which is backed by the power of the state to make and enforce laws, is the most acceptable money in the pyramid. Since it is the law that individuals must pay taxes, they must, assuming they wish to avoid punishment, acquire the state's money. In a sense, the state, unlike any other issuer of promises, can force the acceptance of its liabilities in order for the tax-paying population to settle their obligations to the state. They must accept the state's money. Footnote 13. It might be objected that because bank money is accepted in payment of taxes, citizens needn't acquire the state's money. This is not true. The state accepts bank money because of its special relationship with banks. Specifically, all depository institutions in the U.S. must hold a designated fraction of legal reserves, state money, against demand specified time deposits. When an individual pays her taxes with bank money, draws on her checking account, a conversion to state money occurs, through the clearing process. Thus, while it may appear that the government accepts bank money in payment of taxes, it ultimately accepts only its own currency. End footnote. It is fairly easy to see how the state's liabilities or promises may come to serve as a means of payment and a medium of exchange in private transactions. As Lerner recognized, the modern state can, by accepting it at its pay offices, make anything it chooses generally acceptable as money. He stressed that it is not their status as legal tender, but their acceptance and payment of taxes that makes the state's promises the most acceptable liquid money in the hierarchy. He maintained that it is not enough for the state to simply declare that something is money, that is, to define it as legal tender, for its general acceptability, which is its all-important attribute, stands or falls by its acceptability by the state. Tobin agrees, suggesting that, quote, in advanced societies, the central government is in a strong position to make certain assets generally acceptable media. By its willingness to accept a designated asset in settlement of taxes and other obligations, the government makes that asset acceptable to any who have such obligations, and in turn to others who have obligations to them, and so on. End quote. Thus, the legal obligation to pay taxes and the state's proclamation that it will accept its own currency at state pay offices elevate the state's liabilities to the top of the pyramid, rendering them the promises with the highest degree of acceptability. Although the state's liabilities reign supreme among promises, certain bank promises, as a consequence of their acceptance at state pay offices, also come to serve as means of payment and media of exchange. In particular, demand deposits have attained a special status in our economy because of the special role commercial banks have come to play. Quote from Ray, 1990, page 291. Because the central bank guarantees that demand deposits will trade at par with government currency, and because they are accepted in payment of taxes, bank promises, demand deposits, are nearly as liquid as state money, and therefore occupy the second tier in the pyramid. The promises of firms and households occupy the third and fourth tiers, respectively. This is because there is at least some chance that they will not trade at par with government money, which is needed to pay taxes. For example, a firm may sell bonds to finance the purchase of a new plant. Although the firm promises to pay a certain nominal amount to the holders of these bonds, their value may vary over time, for example, with default risk and/or as interest rates change. Thus, as assets to their holders, these bonds will be less liquid than bank money because they cannot necessarily be quickly converted into the medium of exchange with little loss of value. Still, firms' promises are more readily convertible into the medium of exchange, that is, are more liquid, than households' promises, because better secondary markets exist for their resale. To get business and household debts accepted, they might be made convertible into the debt of someone higher in the pyramid, and may also require interest payments to compensate for the risk associated with holding less liquid assets. In short, not all money is created equal. Although the government, banks, firms, and households can create money denominated in the social unit of account, these monies are not considered equally acceptable. Only the state, through its power to make and enforce tax laws, can issue promises which its constituents must accept if they are to avoid penalties. Acceptance of both state and bank money depends on their usefulness in settling tax and other liabilities to the state. This makes them the decisive money of the hierarchy and enables them to circulate widely as means of payment and media of exchange. All other money gains acceptance by virtue of its convertibility, at least potentially, into relatively more acceptable promises. These monies are not accepted at state pay offices and thus are unlikely to become widely accepted means of payment.